Welcome. Today, we're going to look at a different kind of market data, one that operates on cycles of decades, even centuries. This is a framework that uses these cosmic patterns as a sort of map for the deep structural currents that move our financial world, helping us see major themes long before they ever hit the headlines.
So let's just dive right in. What if you could use the predictable long-term cycles of the outer planets as a kind of cosmic clock? In this explainer, we're going to explore how these cycles can act as blueprints for major economic themes. The kind of powerful shifts that defined entire eras of investment.
So here's our roadmap. First, we'll meet the key players in our cosmic clock. Then we'll look at the core dynamics they create, things like expansion versus contraction. We'll explore a really fascinating theory for how these big themes actually ignite market events. And then finally, we'll build a practical playbook you can actually use. All right, first things first. Let's establish our key data points. I want you to think of these planetary cycles as a kind of cosmic clock, where each hand is moving at a vastly different speed, marking out very distinct economic eras and themes. You can see here the sheer scale that we're dealing with. You've got Jupiter, which moves through a 12-year cycle that often lines up pretty well with typical business cycles. But then way on the other end of the spectrum, you have Pluto. It takes nearly 250 years, signaling these profound generational shifts in things like global power and debt. And that's the real key, learning to separate the short-term noise from these massive underlying tides. Now let's dig into our first major dynamic, the fundamental pulse of the market. This is the great rhythm that swings between periods of growth and consolidation, of just relentless optimism and then sober realism. So on one side, you have Jupiter, representing the expansion of credit, optimism, and sometimes irrational exuberance. And on the other side, you've got Saturn, which represents that inevitable reality check, the consolidation, the structuring, and the hard work that's required to make any growth sustainable. These two forces are in a constant dance with each other. Think of the Jupiterian influence as the wind at the market's back. It's the energy of more credit, more money, more belief in future growth. It encourages speculation, it can inflate bubbles, and it really embodies the principle of expansion in its purest form. This quote is just a perfect example. Former Fed Chair Ben Bernanke's approach to the 2008 crisis was pure Jupiterian energy. Now, in this framework, his birth sign, Sagittarius, is associated with Jupiter's expansive qualities. So his policy of quantitative easing, literally flooding the system with credit to spur growth, is a textbook example of this principle in action. And then there's Saturn. It's the antithesis, it's the force that demands structure, discipline, and responsibility. In the market, Saturn's influence often correlates with tightening credit, recessions, and those periods where the market consolidates and weak structures are really put to the test. It's the necessary, if sometimes painful, reality check. Okay, now let's layer in two other powerful forces that shape market environments. One brings the sudden, electrifying change, while the other can create a fog of confusion where nothing seems certain at all. This is that classic struggle between the old and the new. You've got Saturn, which is tradition and established structure. Then you have Uranus, which is like a lightning strike, the sudden technological breakthrough or the wild disruption that just upends everything. I mean, think about the rise of AI or cryptocurrency challenging the very foundations of traditional finance and business. That's Uranus at work. Neptune's influence, on the other hand, is a lot more like a fog rolling in. It dissolves boundaries, it creates confusion, and it makes it really hard to tell what's real and what isn't. This can fuel bubbles based on pure fantasy or create these periods of deep market uncertainty where narratives become way more powerful than fundamentals. Alan Greenspan's time as Fed chair is a perfect case study here. In this system, his Pisces sign is linked to Neptune's elusive energy. His famous Fed speak was just a masterclass in ambiguity. Markets would hang on his every word, yet they were often left in a total fog of uncertainty, a classic Neptunian environment. Next up, we're going to examine the deepest forces in our framework. These planets govern the tectonic plates of the global economy. We're talking about the structures of power, the nature of debt, and the collective path the market seems destined to follow. Pluto represents forces that feel almost geological in scale, these deep transformative cycles that are often way beyond our control. Its influence correlates with major shifts in global economic power, the restructuring of sovereign debt, and the complete death and rebirth of entire industries. See, Pluto doesn't just change the rules of the game, it changes the entire game itself.
The North Node acts like a kind of compass for the market's collective attention. For roughly 18 months at a time, it highlights a specific theme or a sector where energy, capital, and focus are all flowing. It shows us where the market's momentum is heading, where the story is for that particular period.
So, how do these huge, slow-moving themes actually translate into real market events? Well, the barn and spark theory offers a really simple and powerful explanation for how this mechanism works. This is the core mechanism right here. The outer planets spend months, sometimes even years, building tension and setting a theme. They're slowly filling a barn with dry hay. But nothing really happens until a fast-moving inner planet comes along and provides the spark, igniting all that potential that's been building up. Historical crashes often correlate perfectly with this pattern, a long buildup of outer planet tension which is then ignited by a short-term trigger.
Okay, so let's translate all of this theory into a practical playbook. How can we use this long cycle framework for risk management and to spot some of these long-term opportunities?
Your first task is to identify when the hay is filling the barn, and this means tracking the major alignments of those slow-moving planets and figuring out the dominant background theme. Is it a Jupiterian expansion, a Saturnian contraction, a Uranian disruption? Recognizing this long-term weather pattern is absolutely step one. Next, you watch for the spark. This means you're monitoring the faster-moving planets as they approach sensitive points in the theme you've been tracking. A conjunction, where planets line up in the sky, can be a particularly potent trigger. This is when you watch for those news events or sharp market moves that act as the final catalyst. And this brings it all together into a simple but really powerful process. First, identify the long-term theme. Second, as that theme builds, position your portfolio to manage the volatility that's coming. And third, use those spark events, not as a reason to panic, but as strategic signals for timing your entries and exits. We'll end with this thought. Right now, the dominant background energies involve Saturn's focus on structure and reality and Pluto's theme of deep, systemic transformation. The barn is being filled with a very specific kind of potential. So the most relevant question for any long-term investor is not if there will be a spark, but how will you be positioned when it arrives?